This episode is about the case of Natalia Grace. You want to hear something confusing? Every once in a while, I come across a story where the more information I find, the less certain I become about what actually happened. And this is one of those stories because when I first heard about Natalia Grace, I thought it sounded pretty straightforward. An American family adopts a young girl from Ukraine. End of story. Except, apparently, it wasn't the end of the story at all. The deeper I got into this case, the weirder it became because at some point, Natalia's adoptive parents started believing something almost impossible. They became convinced that the child they adopted wasn't actually a child. They believed she was an adult pretending to be one. Just sit with that for a second, because that is such a bizarre accusation that your brain almost rejects it immediately. It sounds like the plot of a movie, not a real case. So this story revolves around Natalia Grace, a girl from Ukraine with a rare form of dwarfism who was adopted by an American couple, Kristine and Michael Barnett. At first, everything seemed relatively normal. An international adoption, a family trying to help a child. Nothing about it immediately sounds unusual, but apparently, not long after the adoption, the Barnetts began claiming that things didn't add up. They said Natalia's behavior felt older than expected. They questioned her age, they questioned her history, and eventually they started believing something extraordinary, that she wasn't a child at all. She was actually an adult posing as one. And to me, this is where the story starts feeling less like a family story and more like a psychological maze, because once that accusation entered the picture, everything became complicated. Every behavior, every interaction, every memory. Suddenly, the same event would be interpreted in two completely different ways depending on what you already believed. And that's one of the strangest things about human psychology. Once we become convinced of something, we often start viewing everything through that lens. The Barnetts eventually went to court and successfully had Natalia's legal age changed. That was one of the wildest details in this entire story to me. I mean, imagine being told that the age you've lived with your entire life is suddenly no longer your legal age. It sounds almost impossible, but that's exactly what happened. And after that decision, the situation became even more controversial because not long afterward, Natalia ended up living on her own, an apartment by herself. And depending on which version of the story you believed, this was either a capable adult living independently or a vulnerable child being abandoned. There are two completely different realities here, and people looking at the exact same facts often came away with completely different conclusions. That was the part that stayed with me, not necessarily who was right. The fact that people couldn't even agree on what reality looked like. Usually, when you read about a case, new information slowly clears things up. But in this case, it just seemed to do the opposite. Every new detail created more questions. Years later, medical evaluations, DNA testing, interviews, documentaries, and court proceedings continued to fuel debate about what actually happened. Eventually, public opinion started shifting again, and even now, this remains one of those stories where people still argue about different pieces of it. And honestly, that's what makes it so fascinating. This case isn't really about age or adoption or even deception, at least not entirely. It's about perception. It's about what happens when multiple people experience the same situation and walk away believing completely different realities. Once certainty enters the picture, evidence doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it pushes them further apart. And the more I sat with this story, the more unsettling it became because most of us like to think we'd know the truth if it was right in front of us, that we'd see what's really happening, that we'd recognize reality when we encountered it. But stories like this make me wonder how often people are actually reacting to reality and how often they're reacting to the story they've already decided is true. And I'm curious what you think. Do you think most people see reality as it is? Or do you think we all spend more time interpreting reality through our own assumptions than we'd like to admit?